Guys, Emilie has been officialized, so this is a full guide regarding what you should expect from her and what her best themes and builds are. Let's go. Emilie is one of the last characters we'll get into the Fontaine patch cycle, and in my opinion also one of the best ones. As you probably already know, she is a Dendro character, and she has a kit that pretty strictly ties her to the burning elemental reaction. In the eyes of many, this makes her pretty restrictive to play, theoretically speaking, but the way I see it, she is actually quite flexible in how you can build a team for her. But let's start from the beginning, her kit. She's an off-field damage dealer that deals most of her damage through her elemental burst and elemental skill. These two abilities do similar things, as they will both summon an object that kinda looks like a lamp on field and is called Lumidius Case. This object will deal Dendro damage independently from what the active character does, and it can be of different levels. The skill case can either be of level 1 or 2, while the burst case is always level 3. As you can imagine, when you first use the skill, the case will be on level 1, which means it will deal low damage at the start. After that, if the opponent is burning, it will release a scent on field every 2 seconds. The scents will quickly get absorbed by the case, and once it absorbs 2, it will upgrade to level 2. This will typically take a few seconds, but since the skill has a total uptime of 22 seconds, you will get plenty of level 2 hits during the rotation. In particular, while the duration is of 22 seconds, the cooldown is of 14 seconds. So the cooldown is shorter than the duration, and this makes the skill pretty flexible, because you can, for example, reposition it before its uptime ends. Still, it's unlikely that you will ever need to do this because its range is quite wide, almost as wide as the entire Abyss room. To make an in-game comparison with another character, it's as wide as Yae's skill at Constellation 2. The Constellation 2 gives Yae's elemental skill a range boost, while Emilie has that at Constellation 0 already. Anyway, the positive effects of burning on her kit don't just end with the elemental skill thing I mentioned. In fact, thanks to her passive, every 2 cents collected she will generate an extra Dendro attack that deals a lot of damage. Moreover, she also gets a general damage bonus whenever she hits opponents that are afflicted by burning. So it's a lot of things that mixed together become very meaningful to her properly functioning. Now, the elemental burst. As I mentioned earlier, it summons the level 3 case. This case will cast a lot of Dendro hits for a total duration of 2.8 seconds, but the interesting part is what happens after. When the burst is over, the elemental skill case will automatically get summoned without you actually needing to use the skill. This means that if you always use the burst in a rotation, you never need to use the skill. Moreover, if there was an elemental skill case on field before the burst was used, that will be destroyed, but after the burst is over, it will be refreshed and it will also inherit the previous level the case had. So there is a lot of great quality of life here, and it kind of contrasts with how things are in game for other characters. For example, Yae is similar to Emilie in a way because her elemental burst also destroys the skill when it's used, but after it's done hitting, it won't regenerate it. If I had to guess, if Yae came out now instead of back then, she would probably have similar quality of life. So yeah, Emilie is great at what she does, and on top of that she also eliminates the issue of burning teams being self-destructing because she reduces the burning damage received by the teammates by 85%. And as far as burning goes, it's hard to imagine a better designed kit on a unit, but the issue people have with Emilie is that they don't like the idea of having to use burning on a team. The reason is that they believe it's an elemental reaction that kind of restricts what you can do on a team, but don't worry, it's just that they lack imagination. Later in the video, I will show you that Emilie can fit on Monopyro teams, but also on Vape teams, Mel teams, and even Burgeon and Quicken teams. So don't worry about it. But first let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. So before I talk teams, I'll talk her builds, because her requirements in terms of stats stay pretty similar across the board. Despite being a Dendro character, she's an attack scaling unit, so all of her damage scales of attack. And listen to me very carefully, because I'll say this just this once. The burning damage is completely irrelevant to her overall output. It's all about the raw damage she deals, which entirely scales of attack, so please no elemental mastery to build burning damage, please. The other interesting parts about her stat building are her energy requirements. Her burst just costs 50 energy to use, which can make you think that she doesn't need any energy recharge investment, but you couldn't be more wrong than this. Her energy requirements on teams where she's used as the only Dendro character, so most of her teams, can fluctuate between 180 and 200 or even more. In a previous video I had this estimate at 170, but I made a mistake there, sorry. So yeah, they're pretty high, and they open up the possibility to use the burst every other rotation instead of every rotation. On the flip side, they can go down pretty drastically if you use a second Dendro character on the team like Nahida for example, but the thing is, she won't be in this situation a lot of times. Other Dendro characters can deal high damage against burning opponents like Emilie can, so using a second Dendro character is most of the time a wasted slot on a team. There are situations where it's good, but I'll keep it for later. Regarding artifact sets, she has two options mainly, the Reverie set and the Deep Food set. Long story short, in most cases they're pretty even, and things can change a bit depending on which team you're on or which weapon you're using on Emilie, but they stay relatively close. The exception, however, is if you have on a team other means to reduce the resistance to Dendro on opponents, like for example if you're using Zhongli or if you have Emilie's Constellation too. In those cases the Deep Food set takes a pretty big drop. And of course, if you can use the Deep Food set on a character that isn't Emilie on the team, then it becomes useless to put it on her as well, so in that case Reverie is decisively better. And overall, I would say it's the best and most consistent option. For the weapons, her signature is quite fucking massive, high attack values, crit secondary stat, and even energy refunds that Emilie really needs. Nothing else really comes close, not even other 5-star options, but the thing is, Emilie is not a main DPS, she's a sub DPS, which means her total damage won't be comparable to the likes of Arlecchino or Nubilette, so even if you can give her a great weapon, it's not the end of the world. Now let's cook some teams. Cook because she burns. Burning, cooking, get it? So, when it comes to teams, the most natural fit are mono-pyro teams for her. Teams that only focus on pure pyro damage where burning can get disrupted by other elemental reactions. Some of the highest damage Emilie can deal is achieved here, and not just for the burning thing, but also because she gets pyro resonance. In fact, something I didn't mention before is that the passive that grants her damage bonuses whenever she's hitting opponents that are burning scales up the more attack she has. So, attack buffs coming from the outside, like pyro resonance or noblesse oblige for example, benefit both her scalings and their passive. As a rule of thumb, on monopyro teams, she's an upgrade compared to Sean Link in single target situations in terms of damage. This is true on Linnea teams, Arlecchino teams, Klee teams, whatever team. Her pure damage is just higher compared to Sean Link's in these situations, which is pretty impressive because aside from pyro resonance, she's not getting buffs here compared to her. The only downside is that she doesn't quite have the AoE range that the US chef has. All of Emilie's hits are pretty much single target oriented, while Sean Link can hit on a wide AoE range thanks to her Pyronado. Still, burning is a reaction that amounts to quite nice damage if you're facing multiple opponents, so hopefully that makes up for it. Secondarily, Emilie can be used on Vapor Melt teams that use Pyro characters to enable reactions from Hydro or Cryo characters. So, Ganyu Melt, Priestley Melt, Nubilette Vape, Furina Vape, and so on. On these teams, the pyro application from characters like Shenling is needed to set up the elemental reactions, and since burning generates extra pyro aura, it contributes to that supply. Truth be told, in these compositions, Shenling's pyro application is just enough to set up the elemental reactions, and the burning isn't really required, but since Emilie deals quite damage, she makes it worth it, high enough that she's arguably the best option on these teams for the characters I mentioned. Then for Emilie there are also Quicken teams, specifically Quick Burn teams where you mix Quicken and Burning. The core idea behind this premise is that Burning doesn't immediately disrupt Quicken, but rather it steadily decreases its aura. They can theoretically coexist, but the essential part is that the Burning aura can't overwhelm the Quicken aura, and for this to happen the electro application on the team must be pretty significant. As a result, it's a concept that works best on double electro teams like Fischl Sino, Fischl Clorand. It can also work with just one electro character like Fischl Constellation 6 for example on a double Dendro team without Hate MSD carry, but in those scenarios you really have to be wary of your pyro applier. The pyro application needs to be lower than the electro application on the team, and that's why you need Fischl Constellation 6 here, because the Constellation 6 gives her extra electro application. But regardless, it's still less consistent compared to double electro teams because Fischl's application is mostly single target oriented, which means that in AoE you won't get much Quicken. Then, Burgeon teams. Burgeon teams are also possible with Emilie. The problem you have to solve here is the Hydro applier, because Hydro application can remove the Dendro application from the opponents by triggering blooms. If there is no Dendro application, you can get any burning either, so that's the problem. As a result, you need a strong second Dendro applier here, like Nahida for example, to make it harder for Hydro appliers like Xingqiu to completely remove the Dendro aura from the opponents when they trigger Bloom. In fact, even with a Hydro applier on the team, if you have Dendro applied on the opponent when you apply Pyro, you will get a burning take. Of course, you won't get burning for long here, because the Hydro application can wash it away pretty quickly, but a split second is enough to get the sense up and amplifies Emilie's damage. Lastly, she could even be a nice fit on Nilou Bloom teams where she gets no burning. That's because her elemental burst is just a 13 seconds cooldown and applies a lot of Dendro in AoE. For Dendro characters on Nilou teams, it's more about how much Dendro they can apply rather than how much damage they can deal, so Emilie can fit well here. For example, I don't know, Nahida, Emilie, Kokomi and Nilu can be a good composition. And that's about it. As you can see, she got Bloom teams, Burgeon teams, Quicken teams, Monopyro teams, Melt teams, Vape teams, she got a lot of teams actually. Due to her kit, she might seem quite restrictive, but since in actuality burning is pretty flexible, she's not. Lastly, her Constellations. She can get about a 50% damage increase from her first two Constellations combined. I won't talk about technicalities because the damage increase is quite straightforward actually, but the Constellation 2 is interesting because it decreases Dendro resistance on opponents. Other than increasing her own damage, this makes her a better support on Nilu Bloom teams, Burgeon teams, Double Dendro Weekend teams, so the Constellation 2 makes her even more flexible than she is. And I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe and also go check the Furina guide I made a few weeks ago. Bye bye!